What if your unanswered prayer isn't a no? It's the doorway to hidden healing. In 30 seconds, you'll see why your pain lingers and what God is turning right now. Maybe you're under bills that won't stop, a relationship that cracked, or a diagnosis you didn't expect. Maybe you've asked, again and again, did God forget my name? Before we go further, comment, I trust God, so this finds someone who needs it. Now breathe. Picture this, the God who spoke light into the dark, who split a sea for slaves with no way out, who called the dead to rise by name. He's looking into your storm and saying, trust me, I'm about to fix it. Pain often disguises purpose. We assume breaking means the end, but in God's hands, breaking becomes building. He won't waste a single tear, a single night you stared at the ceiling, a single moment you held your breath waiting for the phone to ring. He's been working while you were worrying. He's been rearranging what you can't reach. And if the silence has felt cruel, hear this. Hidden healing often starts where proof ends. Ready to see it? Maybe you told yourself, I can't take another step. Maybe you wondered, where are you, God? What if the quiet wasn't absence but alignment? The pieces moving backstage so that when the curtain lifts, you'll recognize a divine turnaround you couldn't have scripted. This isn't a generic pep talk about trying harder or pretending it doesn't hurt. This is biblical wisdom for real people with real wounds. It's about the moment God's strength enters where yours breaks. It's about mercy that meets you before you deserve it, and power that moves before you can see it. If your heart is racing and your mind is tired, you're not disqualified. You're right on time. Open your heart. Keep breathing. Watch for the next line of light through the clouds. The same voice that said, "Let there be light," is speaking over your chaos now, and what he starts, he finishes. There are nights when pain feels too deep for words. You stare at the ceiling, trying to breathe through the ache. You want to pray, but your heart feels heavy. You want to believe, but heaven feels silent. Yet right there, in the stillness between sobs, God is closer than your next breath. He doesn't just notice your pain, he knows it. Psalm chapter 56 verse 8 says, You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. Every tear has a story, and God has numbered them all. Not wasted, not ignored, numbered. Where did you hide your last tear? And what if God saw it first? The creator of the universe counts what the world overlooks. The ones you cried when the relationship ended. The ones that fell after the diagnosis. The ones you buried behind a practiced smile. When you realize he counted every tear, shame loses leverage. To God, your pain is not background noise, it's sacred ground. He walks with you through the valley, even when you think you're walking alone. Take Jesus. Isaiah chapter 53 verse 3 calls him a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. He knew betrayal, loneliness, misunderstanding. He carried heartbreak so that when you cry, you're never crying alone. He meets pain with compassion, not distance. Psalm chapter 34 verse 18 says, The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. I once met a woman named Sarah from North Carolina. After her husband left, she slept on the couch every night, half afraid, half hoping he'd come home. Her prayers turned to silence until one night she read that same verse from Psalm chapter 34. She told me, It wasn't that the pain vanished, it's that I realized I wasn't facing it alone. Months later, her circumstances hadn't changed much, but her peace had. When your heart breaks, heaven bends low. God doesn't look away from your wounds. He leans in. He knows how to hold what's fragile without letting it fall apart. So if you feel unseen, remember, the same hands that shaped galaxies are holding your heart together. The storm may roar, but you are not invisible in it. God sees, God knows. And even before you find the words to pray, He's already working through your pain. Trust Him in the ache. What feels unbearable today may be the soil where tomorrow's healing begins. Every believer eventually hits the wall. The moment strength runs out, faith shakes, and nothing you try seems to work. You've prayed, planned, and pushed, yet the mountain still stands. Maybe you've whispered, "God, are you waiting for me to fix this myself?" But He never asked you to carry the weight, only to trust Him with it. There's a sacred turning point when you finally say, "I can't." That's the cue heaven has been waiting for. The Apostle Paul knew this when he begged God to remove his thorn. God replied, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." He didn't take the struggle away. He filled it with strength. Weakness doesn't bench you, it badges you for power. Think of Moses standing at the Red Sea. Behind him, an army. Before him, a wall of water. No escape, no plan. Yet at that very end of himself, God said, "Lift your staff." The sea split. That's the rhythm of heaven. Human limits, divine intervention. Daniel faced lions. He couldn't silence. God did it for him. If you need God to step in, write, "Step in, Lord," in the comments. Because sometimes the smallest surrender triggers the greatest miracle. The pattern continues. A widow once stared at an empty jar of oil, wondering how to feed her children. She couldn't multiply what she didn't have, but God could. Peter stepped out onto waves that defied logic, and when he sank, Jesus' hand pulled him up. Their weakness became the stage for God's strength. Maybe for you, the lions are overdue bills. Maybe the Red Sea is your failing marriage. Maybe the storm is a diagnosis you never saw coming. But your limits aren't the end of your story. They're the invitation for His glory. When your strength ends, His begins. I met a man named David from Ohio, a single father who lost his job right after Christmas. He said he used to sit in his car after interviews, gripping the steering wheel, fighting tears. "I thought God wasn't helping me," he told me. But He already was. Weeks later, a friend from church introduced him to a company hiring for his exact skills, a position that hadn't even existed until that week. That's when he realized, God doesn't need our plan. He just needs our trust. So if you're standing at the edge of your own sea, don't panic. The same voice that parted waters still whispers through your fear. Lay down the illusion of control. Say with Paul, "When I am weak, then I am strong." Because when you can't, God can, and He's about to prove it. Faith often grows in the dark. It's hard to believe that God is working when nothing seems to move. But heaven's silence isn't neglect. It's strategy. The kingdom of God moves like a seed under the soil, unseen yet alive. What looks still on the surface is often sacred motion beneath. Think about Joseph. Sold by his brothers, chained, and forgotten in prison. If you stopped there, it looked like failure. But what Joseph couldn't see was that every betrayal was placement, every delay was preparation. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. God didn't just rescue Joseph. He used his suffering to save nations. Now imagine Esther. To the world, she was just another young woman chosen to be queen. But God was writing something bigger, orchestrating a rescue before danger even had a name. When her people were threatened, she was already in position. What seemed ordinary was actually divine alignment. What if God's not yet is your rescue in disguise? What if the delay you resent is the timing that's saving you? Heaven is like an orchestra tuning in the dark. The noise sounds random until the lights rise and the melody begins. What you call confusion, God calls composition. Maybe right now you're praying and nothing's changing. The job hasn't come through. The diagnosis still stands. The relationship still feels stuck. The delay isn't denial. It's direction. God is weaving together people, places, and timing in ways you couldn't imagine if you tried. A man named Anthony from Florida told me his story. He prayed for months for a new job, but doors kept closing. What he didn't know was that the company he applied to was restructuring. Weeks later, a new department opened, one designed perfectly for his skills. When they called, the hiring manager said, "It's almost like this position was made for you." Anthony smiled. That's because it was. Isaiah chapter 55 verse 8 reminds us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways." The detour you dread may be the path you'll one day praise. The timing you question may be the mercy that spares you. So if you see nothing happening, hold steady. God doesn't need to announce his moves to prove he's moving. You may not see his hand, but it's still writing. One day you'll look back and realize every closed door, every pause, every delay was part of his orchestration, and the song he's composing will be worth the wait. We live in a world addicted to speed, fast food, fast news, fast answers. But biblical timing is not earthly timing. God doesn't rush, and yet he's never late. When you trust God in the delay, he shapes more than outcomes. He shapes hearts. Sometimes waiting isn't punishment, it's preparation. David knew this. Anointed as king, yet sent back to sheep. Chosen, but chaste. From the outside, it looked wasted. Inside, God was forging a king. Lions in secret, giants in public. Delay isn't defeat. Abraham waited decades for the promised son. He stumbled, doubted, tried shortcuts. Still, faith in waiting grew roots. Each year deepened trust in the one who keeps his word. When Isaac arrived, Abraham didn't just hold a child, he held a story that proved God's faithfulness. Even Jesus waited, 30 quiet years before 3 public. Obscurity wasn't empty, it was essential. The Savior honored divine timing, showing us that hidden seasons prepare holy assignments. Mirror question: what if God's delay is saving you from something you're not ready to carry? Mini hook: what if your waiting isn't wasted, but weaponized? I met a man named Chris who lost everything in the 2008 crash. He thought waiting for recovery would break him. I kept thinking God had forgotten me, he said, but he was rebuilding me. In those years, he found a small church, rediscovered faith, and served quietly. 5 years later, he launched a business that provided for his family and funded missions across Latin America. If God had answered when I wanted, he told me, I would have missed the foundation he was building in me. If you're still waiting, type, "I'll wait on God," because waiting is worship. Isaiah chapter 40 verse 31 promises that those who wait on the Lord renew strength. They rise, they run, they endure. Waiting doesn't drain you when you trust God. It trains you. It stretches faith. It strengthens character. It teaches your heart to soar above circumstances. So if you're in a waiting season, don't call it wasted. Call it holy. Trust the slow work of God. He's preparing you for what He's already prepared for you. When the answer comes, you'll see it clearly. The silence was sowing something sacred. There's a weight heavier than pain: control. And maybe that's what's crushing you. The more you try to fix it, the further it slips. We plan, push, pray harder, believing that if we just hold tight enough, everything will stay together. But control is an illusion. The tighter the grip, the weaker the peace. Your grip is blocking your grace. Surrender isn't giving up. It's giving over. It's saying, God, I can't, but you can. When you release the outcome, heaven begins to move, because God can't fill hands that are already clenched. Jesus showed us this in Gethsemane. The weight of the cross pressed against his soul. Blood in his sweat, silence in his prayer, and still he whispered, "Not my will, but yours be done." One sentence changed eternity. Through surrender came resurrection. Through yielding came victory. What's the one thing you refuse to release? The relationship, the diagnosis, the dream. If you're surrendering something today, comment, "I release it to God." Because sometimes the miracle doesn't start with a shout. It starts with an open hand. Hannah understood this. Years of tears, ridicule, and longing for a child. When she finally laid her grief at the altar and walked away, peace entered before the promise did. Her surrender birthed Samuel, a prophet who would anoint kings and alter history. What she released, God redeemed. And maybe your Gethsemane looks different. A marriage unraveling, a future uncertain, a dream that feels dead. You've done all you can, and now heaven whispers, "Let go." When you surrender, you don't lose control. You return it to the only one who ever had it. I once met a woman named Lisa from Colorado. For years, she tried to manage everything: her family, finances, even her faith. But when her business collapsed, she reached the end of herself. For the first time, she said, "I prayed without giving God instructions." Months later, doors opened she hadn't even knocked on. When I let go, she told me, peace walked in. Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 to 7 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts." Notice, control doesn't bring peace. Surrender does. So what are you still gripping? What outcome won't you release? Open your hands, lay it down. Trust God with what's breaking, because every surrender is the soil where resurrection begins. Broken doesn't mean finished. Broken is the beginning of beautiful. You may feel like life has collapsed, the job gone, the marriage fading, the strength slipping away. You look at the ruins and whisper, "Is this how my story ends?" But in the hands of God, endings become openings. Job knew that truth. In one moment, everything was stripped away: wealth, health, family. Yet when the dust settled, God didn't just restore him. He doubled what was lost. Job's story didn't end in ashes. It became a song for those who suffer. Because when God rebuilds, he never replaces what was. He multiplies what will be. Peter's story carried the same heartbeat. He promised faithfulness and then denied Jesus 3 times. Shame should have buried him, but the resurrected Christ found him, not to condemn, but to commission. 3 denials met 3 words: feed my sheep. Failure turned to calling. Fear turned to fire. What if your greatest failure is just a setup for grace? Then there was Paul, the persecutor turned preacher. The man who once broke the church became the man who built it. His scars became sermons. His weakness became witness. That's the pattern of heaven. Pain repurposed, wounds rewritten, brokenness reborn. I met a young woman named Rebecca who battled addiction for nearly a decade. "I thought God was done with me," she said, but he wasn't. After hitting rock bottom, she entered a faith-based recovery center and surrendered her life to Christ. Today, she leads a ministry helping others find freedom. "My brokenness," she told me, "became the bridge for someone else's healing." If God's ever turned your mess into meaning, type, "He did it for me." Romans chapter 8, verse 28 reminds us, "In all things God works for the good of those who love him." Not some things, all things. Even the heartbreaks, the failures, the nights you wish you could erase. God weaves them into purpose you can't yet see. But beyond healing, there's a greater truth. Victory belongs to the Lord. David faced Goliath not with armor, but with assurance. The battle is the Lord's. That's the secret. You don't fight for victory, you fight from it. Maybe your giant isn't 9 feet tall, but it feels just as real. The debt, the depression, the diagnosis. Whatever form it takes, remember this: you are not fighting alone. The same power that rolled away the stone is still rolling away despair. The same hands that broke bread are still breaking chains. Trust him, not just with the easy parts, but the shattered ones. Because one day, When the dust clears, you'll see it. The breaking was the blessing, the waiting was the working, and the victory was never earned. It was inherited. As we reach the end of this message, pause for a moment and look back. Not with regret, but with reverence. Every pain that pressed you, every delay that stretched you, every unanswered prayer that left you wondering has been part of a divine design. You may not have seen it while it was unfolding, but God was there in every frame. The same hands that held Joseph in the pit, David in the cave, and Jesus in the tomb are holding you right now. Can you see it now? What he was doing while you were waiting? Your pain has never been wasted. Not one tear, not one prayer, not one night alone. Every moment has been shaping something sacred. God has been working quietly, molding you in the silence, preparing you for what he's about to release. Heaven has never been still. It's been strategic. He's not just turning your breaking into blessing. He's transforming your endurance into evidence, your waiting into strength, your surrender into peace. The proof of his hand isn't in the outcome. It's in the becoming. You've been refined in the fire, not burned by it. Psalm chapter 46 verse 10 whispers, "Be still and know that I am God." That means stop wrestling with what's already his. Stop carrying what was never yours to hold. Breathe. Let him finish what he started. The ending he's writing will outshine every plan you thought you lost. So here's the question. Will you trust him now? Not after the fix, but before it. Not when you see the answer, but while you're still in the waiting. Because trust isn't passive, it's an act of worship. It's resting in the truth that God is already ahead of you. If this message spoke to your spirit, take a moment. Type, "I trust God." Not as a comment, but as a declaration. Share this with someone who needs to remember that heaven hasn't forgotten them. And if you're walking this journey of faith, join this space, subscribe, and stand with us. Because your story isn't over. God is not done. And the same power that rolled away the stone is still rewriting stories, starting with yours.